Hello everybody, I am Jared Ross, a Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to How White is Dan? DNA Test Results by Daniel Howell. Now, this is a YouTuber I'm slightly familiar with. He's kind of been on the platform for many years. He's done a lot of collaborations with different YouTubers. I think even there was like a React channel reaction to him because he did a thing like it's called Dan and Phil, I think, or something like that. But he's done a lot of different comedic sort of videos, I want to say. This will be kind of interesting to see what is his ancestry. He is British, I guess. The video, How White is Dan? So basically, how European is he? So I guess it'll just be interesting to see. Does he come back as just a typical Northwestern European admixture, which is that typical mix of British, Irish, Scottish, Swedish, Scandinavian, a little bit of maybe French Canadian, or not French Canadian, French and German thrown in there. It'd be funny if it was French Canadian. And then, you know, if he does get other things that might stand out a little bit more, but I get the feeling he's probably going to come back like 100% European. But I'm not going to really say anything else. Let's just go ahead and jump right into the video.
So Phil, who's done one of these videos himself, ordered me one of these DNA test kits off the internet, which you can
23andMe.
understand I was a bit scared to do for quite a while, because spitting into a tube and mailing it to some laboratory somewhere, you can see how that's weird, right? But hey, I thought now is the time. So I used the name John Johnson, as if there's any point in trying to protect my identity on the internet. Okay, are you ready? Am I ready? I have no idea what to expect, to be honest. Let's go. I'm going to be related to a giraffe or something, aren't I?
I wonder if he will show genetic matches. So few do.
Dan's Ancestry.
Oh, look at that. He's got some West African in there, but a lot of that typical Northwest European breakdown, but covering all of all of Europe.
Looking pretty white. Okay. Wow. That is one blue circle right there, isn't it, JJ? Okay, let's get into the numbers. Wow, 98.2% European. There we go. Okay, this was a fun video. Learned a lot. Time to go. Bye, everyone. Mostly British and Irish with a bit of French and German. Wow. Well, my ancestors really got out there and saw the world, didn't they? They literally stuck to 4 countries. 2% Scandinavian, 4% Southern European. Okay, someone saw the sun at least. 0%.
Now, what was the Southern European? Because it breaks it down: Southern European, Iberian, Balkan, Sardinian, and then it's cut off. I'm guessing it's probably just broadly Southern European then.
4% Southern European. Okay, someone saw the sun at least. 0% Asian or American. Didn't want to go on any long walks or get on a boat. I guess I can understand that. 0% Middle Eastern. 1.8% West African. That is incredibly specific.
Now, assuming that 1.8% is coming from one recent ancestor, that would be the equivalent of maybe like a 3rd or a 4th great grandparent. Could be technically as close as a 2nd great grandparent if he just didn't inherit as much of that DNA. But that's one of those readings that it'd be very interesting to see one of his parents test, or both of them test, to see do one of them get that reading or do neither of them, because it could be a misread. Although on the continental level with DNA testing, you have a higher confidence of deciphering between the continents rather than, you know, between a region. So there is a high confidence with it. So if he does his whole family tree and builds it out to all of his 2nd great grandparents and identifies all of them, then identifies all of his 3rd great grandparents and identifies all of his 4th great grandparents, assuming that this African reading is correct, he'd most likely find an African ancestor somewhere in there.
Long history of people that don't travel at all, and then all of a sudden a Scandi and a West African get it together. So according to the timeline, at some point between 1780 and 1870...
Yeah, so kind of like I was saying, could be as close as a 2nd great grandparent, maybe a little bit more distant. So 1 is parents, 2 grandparents, 3 great grandparents, 4 2nd great grandparents, 3rd great grandparents, 4th, 5th, and then so on. Now, technically at 1.8%, it could even go back even further. You know, there's sometimes where just a segment just gets inherited and inherited and inherited just because of the randomness of recombination. And so it could be a lot further back and just seems a lot closer. So if that's the case, one of his parents would DNA test and they would get a similar 1.8% reading, maybe a little bit more, maybe 2%. But if it's a little bit closer on the scale and, you know, not as far back, and maybe it is more of a 2nd or 3rd great grandparent, then if one of his parents were to test, they'd most likely get, you know, a 4% or a 5% reading, or maybe even more. If it's as close as a second great grandparent for him, that's as close as a great grandparent for one of his parents, and that means they could be getting like 12% DNA, and he's just not inheriting a whole lot of it. So it is a very interesting reading for his known ancestry.
There was a 100% West African and Scandinavian couple.
Doesn't mean that they were a couple. This is not saying that they were a couple. This is just saying, based on the percentages of that reading of Scandinavian, West African, French and German, and British and Irish, that's where they're guessing your most recent ancestor with almost 100% of that DNA was. So with British and Irish, they're saying it could be one of your parents, but it could be that your most recent ancestor that had fully British Irish ancestry was a great grandparent. So parent, grandparent, great grandparent. Then with the French and German, what they're saying is it could be as close as a great grandparent, could be as distant as a third great grandparent. But it's not saying that they're couples, or that this is like, you know, they went from West Africa to Scandinavia to French and, you know, this is one of those charts that 23andMe gives that I find a lot of people have a hard time reading. And there's a lot of assumptions by people that don't really know the DNA stuff in depth.
100% West African and Scandinavian couple. What is the story there? Let me look it up. According to Wikipedia, in the 1800s, Scandinavians emigrated to Africa for better farming because they were all dying.
Now, this isn't necessarily the story of his family. It could be, but this isn't necessarily what that story is. And this is kind of the issue that, one of the reasons too that I started doing reactions is watching videos of YouTubers get their results and then kind of make these large assumptions just because of, lack of a better term, ignorance of how the DNA test works and what it actually means. And so it is very easy to be like, oh, so this means that I came from this ancestry. If I had a Scandinavian ancestor who went to Africa and then had a kid and then I descend from that. Doesn't necessarily mean that.
I mean, you can't blame them. It is pretty cold up there, I guess. This is actually really weird because one half of my family are all just farmers living in the countryside. I'm not close to them, but once I went to a family reunion and I had like 400 distant cousins. It was the weirdest thing ever. But on the other side of my family, my grandma was adopted, and literally nobody knows anything about my grandma's family.
With the DNA test, you can figure out who your grandma's biological parents were. And especially if you get your parents to test, and even better, if she's still alive and you can get her to test, you have a higher chance of figuring it out. But because of your DNA test, you have a step in the right direction to actually get that done. And there are tons of people who actually do this work as volunteer, called Search Angels, where they help people to discover their biological family through DNA testing research. Now, it wasn't always DNA testing, because there were ways to figure out adoptions before DNA testing was around, but it was a lot more difficult and a lot of questions with it. But if this is the case, I mean, for one, a grandparent, that means that 25% of his ancestry is completely unknown. But even more, if he is able to figure that ancestry out and then build out that tree, might be quite amazing to see what he's able to find, and possibly even if that African ancestor's in that area of the tree.
So if anyone had the half Norway, half Ghana grandparents, it has to be that mysterious grandma. I feel like there's some epic, adventurous story behind that for another time. And wow, look, you can literally see the journey that they did. So in the beginning, like all of us, started in Africa.
So what he's looking at here, this is a paternal haplogroup. So this is looking at his Y DNA. And when you have your Y DNA, your Y chromosome, it's passed from father to son almost unchanged. But every once in a while, there's a mutation, which we call SNP markers, basically, is we're looking for these single nucleotide polymorphisms. This one nucleotide in the Y chromosome that changed at some mutation, and every descendant of the person where that mutation happened, every descendant with their Y chromosome will have that same mutation. So using these mutations, we can then track through time how everybody's connected. And so here you have that track of going from A, which is, Y chromosomal Adam, to then this FM89 is his line, then KM9 to RM207, and so on and so forth. And so it goes down, 275,000 years ago was A. Then 76,000 years ago about was when FM89 formed. So sometime between 275,000 years ago and 76,000 years ago, his paternal line went from this area of Africa all the way up to somewhere in the Middle East. And then 53,000 years ago, they went over to here where this KM9 was. And then 20,000 or 35,000 years ago, it was this RM207, etc. So this is the haplogroup, which 23andMe gives you the Y haplogroup and the mitochondrial haplogroup. So imagine I'll show that in a bit, but let's continue.
Africa, and then hopped across the Red Sea, apparently spent some time in Asia, presumably wrestling mammoths and getting frozen or something, and then buggered off to Europe to get...
So this is the story of his purely paternal line. So going back up his father, and going up every single one of their fathers, this is the storyline of them going back through time. So this is literally one line of his family.
All right, now the fun stuff. Apparently, by scanning your DNA, they can work out all kinds of weird things about your personality and your health and biology. This is very intimate, specific information that is the kind of stuff I probably shouldn't share with the internet, but I'm just a piece of meat. Let's get into it. Neanderthal ancestry. How much of my DNA is similar to that of Neanderthal bones that they Jesus. I am more of a Neanderthal than 82% of the people. Wow. Cheek dimples. This is important. You are not likely to have cheek dimples. Look at this shit. I have double cheek dimples.
This is why they use the terminology not likely, maybe likely. It's not 100% you don't have it. It's just based on the variants that they've identified to indicate someone has cheek dimples. You aren't getting the majority of those variants, and thus they say most likely not to get that. In fact, in my 23andMe, I think they gave me a 5% chance of having red hair. I'm a very obvious ginger.
I'm deformed on both sides of my face, clearly. This entire thing is just garbage pseudoscience, out the window. What else can this farce tell me? Okay, blonde hair. I am unlikely to have blonde hair. You know what? I'm just going to put this out there.
See, look, has 1 to 2 variants associated with blonde hair. Approximately 10% of 23andMe customers with this result report having blonde hair.
So, as well as all of the interesting stuff about your ancestry and what it can tell you about your body, something that analyzing your DNA can do is tell you what possibly genetic diseases you might be predisposed to. And this is some pretty heavy stuff, so there's a huge disclaimer right here that's literally saying once you open these results, it might drastically affect your life, because if they say you're more likely to get something when you're older, then that might just be that.
Now here's the thing with these tests, do not take them as, the gospel. Basically, if they say you're more likely to have this, doesn't mean you're going to. It just means that you have the variants that from their studies are associated with people that do have it. At the same time, if it tells you you are less likely to have this, don't take it as, well, I don't have it, because it's just telling you that the variants they've found associated with people that have it, you don't really have those. But as we've seen with his dimple thing, and as I mentioned with the red hair thing, the traits, it's the same thing as this medical stuff. That's just the ones they've identified. It doesn't mean that they've identified all of them. So with these results, the best way to take them is as something of general possibility and, something that may guide you in what you do further with your medical provider, but don't take these as medical advice. And if anything, if you are concerned about anything, then go and talk with your medical provider and talk with a genetic counselor instead of, just focusing on this stuff, because there are much more in-depth medically acceptable tests that do test for a lot of the things that they talk about here. So big disclaimer for me too.
Should I do one? YOLO, here we go. This copy of your gene is not associated with higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. That was a risky click. Okay, moving on quickly. Oh my god. Forget all that. This is serious. Are you ready for this? the red hair gene. This will truly affect my future in ways I may not understand. I mean, I did this video because I want to be open. I want to share these things with you. I hope that, sharing my ancestry and, who I am and what I'm made of will make us all come together. But I hope you appreciate this is pretty heavy. Let's do it. You have one variant in the gene associated with red hair. People with this result are known as...
See, I got to say only 5% of 23andMe customers with this result report having red hair. I'm part of the 5%.
Carriers. They may have children with red hair. So you're telling me that there's a chance that I can have children born with red hair? There was no disclaimer for this one. I can never take this back. I'm just kidding, you beautiful sunset heads. Rub those freckles all over me. Okay, it's time for the big one. The question that my friends, people on the internet have been wondering all this time: skin pigmentation. How white is Dan Howell? Are you
I
ready
think
for
that's
this?
pretty easy to see.
You are likely to have lighter skin. Okay, well, yeah, I think we all guessed.
With the offset black hair and the black shirt, it really pops the skin, man.
That bit, thanks for that. What's the number? Oh! Wow, 96% lighter skin. Look at this breakdown. It's not even like at most I am 25% light beige. I hope you found this interesting and it compels you to go spit in a tube and send it to some scientists, or more likely to definitely never do it. And yeah, I'm gonna go work on becoming that elite power athlete that I was born to be by seeing how many sit-ups I can do, rocking backwards and forwards in the corner, crying whenever I read the news.
All right, well, that was a pretty decent video. Nothing amazing. The African thing was pretty interesting, and I'd be interested to see what he'd be able to figure out through that if he's tried. This video is from like 6 years ago, so it's been a long time, and more than likely, I'm pretty sure 23andMe has done a bunch of updates since then. Kind of a lot of the typical YouTuber seeing their DNA test tropes with this of, kind of making light of some of the stuff, going through the trades, going through the medical stuff, kind of understanding it, but just kind of taking it all at, the basic level. It would be quite interesting to see if, he tries to figure out his grandmother's biological ancestry, being that she was adopted, and what might be hiding back there that, makes up for some of the admixture that he had. And as usual, kind of disappointed that didn't go into genetic matches, but then again, I think most YouTubers don't. If Dan ever wanted to be on my YouTuber family tree series and have me try to figure out who his grandmother's biological family was and figure out more of his family tree as well, I'd love to have him on there. I know that he's kind of been on and off of YouTube over the past few years, or I think he kind of came back on at one point, but I don't know if he's still doing videos or not. But he'd be a great guest to have on, especially a big YouTuber like him. Now, if you enjoyed this reaction, be sure to check out this video right here where I do another reaction to a different YouTuber's DNA test results. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel.